Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live, where the focus will be on whether your workforce is overlooking the power of neurodiversity. Now, joining us today is Professor Rob Austin, who is the Professor of Information Systems at Ivey Business School and an expert on how neurodiversity is transforming business innovation. We are also joined by Megan Pilatzke, an autistic inclusion specialist Stern, Canada, and a passionate advocate for accessibility and neuro-inclusion. Professor Austin, Megan, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks. Thanks for inviting.
Absolutely. And so I wanted to remind our audience, thank you to all of you for joining today. Our LinkedIn Lives, as you know, are interactive. So if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the comment section of the LinkedIn Live. We're going to make sure we try to get to as many as possible today. Because we have a panel, our LinkedIn Live will actually be extended for a total of 40 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes. So again, we want to get to as many questions as possible. Speaking of questions, I've got many myself, and I'd love to kick us off with the first one. Let's start off by defining neurodiversity. Now, Rob, can you share what this term means to you? And then Megan, can you follow up with your perspective?
Sure. So neurodiversity usually refers to the idea that neurological differences like those that we see in autism, ADHD, dyslexia, a variety of other conditions also, that they reflect normal variations in brain development. So it's a descriptive term, right? You might say it just describes an indisputable reality that people's brains work differently, and that's natural and normal across the human population. There is also kind of a perspective or a philosophy that is implied by the term. It adds a value statement to the idea, the descriptive idea, right? It says that neurodiversity is not only natural and normal, but that we should recognize this and accept that it's okay, and that we should design the world with this in mind. So it says there's no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving. It says that people who with differences don't need to be cured, though they might need some help and accommodation. The reason it's relevant, I think, in a lot of business contexts is because research suggests that 15% to 20% of the world's population might be neurodistinct, but that they are or underemployed at an 85 to 90% rate, despite the fact that they have often very valuable skills. Just also to note, neurodiversity is usually described, it's a characteristic of a group. You could say a group is neurodiverse. When we're talking about individuals, we usually describe them as either neurodivergent or neurodistinct. We in our research group have come to prefer the word neurodistinct over neurodivergent. Neurodivergent is much more common, but neurodistinct has the advantage that it doesn't imply some sort of normal that we are referring people to. So I guess that's a brief summary.
Thank you for that. And I like that piece about neurodistinct, and especially because we aren't implying that something is normal or not normal. So I appreciate you providing that definition. Megan, your thoughts and your perspective.
I think that Rob really provided quite a bit of already my perspective, but essentially my takeaway with neurodiversity is really that it's all brains. It's not just neurodistinct or neurodivergent brains. It's all brains. And it's simply just the diversity in how we each think, how we process, how we see, and ultimately just how we experience the world. It's not something special we need to do. It's really is. Everybody in this room is encompassed by the concept of neurodiversity, whether you're in the conversation with us or you're in the chat. So that's really, but like I say, Rob really overall spoke to my view, and I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
And I love how you framed it. It's all brains, right? It's all brains. I'm going to come back to you, Rob. So you spent years researching neurodiversity in organizations. So why do you think this topic has become so crucial for businesses today?
There's a lot of reasons. So there's some very practical reasons. One of the practical reasons is that companies can never quite find enough skills and talent. And so especially, I think is one of the reasons why this has been especially big in the tech industry, that there are companies out there that just can't find enough software developers or software testers or data scientists or whatever. And that has made them open to tapping alternative talent pools, right? Talent pools that they might have overlooked. Another reason I think is companies have come around to understanding that this is a way of building organizational capability. One of my favorite quotes on this is from Ginny Fleury, who's the Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft. She says that neuro-inclusion is a way that Microsoft can make sure their products and services work across the spectrum of being human, right? And so there's a real practical, it makes our products better reason. There's some other reasons too, of course. One of them is fairness. Neurodistinct people deserve opportunity. It also helps make work meaningful to everyone who works for a company. Everybody can kind of get in line with fairness and opportunity for people who deserve it. And the other thing, I guess I'll mention one more thing, is that the incidence of neurodistinctness is high enough in the general population that a lot of people, or maybe this is true of you, you have a personal stake, right? That you either are neurodistinct or you know someone who's neurodistinct or you have a family member. We estimate that between 800 million and 1.2 billion people in the world could be considered neurodistinct. And so, that's just a lot of talent not to tap into, right?
Absolutely. Wow. And even the spectrum of being human, right? And how you use that, I think, is incredibly important. And untapped talent, or talent you might have missed before. We need to go back to that. And Megan, I want to come to you because I think this is an important question. What are some common misconceptions about neurodiversity that you encounter in your day-to-day or in the workplace?
Yeah, so Specialist Sterna, for those on the call that are unfamiliar, we work with organizations worldwide, but in terms of my particular role, I work with Canada and as well as with United States-based businesses. And of course, I encounter a lot of misconceptions about what neurodiversity really is. The most common one that I kind of alluded to is that neurodiversity only refers to neurodivergent or neurodistinct people, which of course isn't true. It applies to everybody, every single person in the world. Another common one that I often see, and it really goes hand in hand with that first one. Commonly, if someone has this belief, they also believe that we need to do these special or extraordinary things to accommodate neurodivergent people, to hire neurodivergent people. And again, that's really, really far from the case. Everyone in the workplace absolutely needs training to help break these stereotypes that are going on. They're wide, they're fierce, they're across every single company I've ever worked with. And seeing those, I would say those are the two most common, but certainly, depending on the company that I work with, there may be more individualized ones that are more specific. Certainly, I see as well when individuals have a personal connection, which, as Rob kind of alluded to, is likely that there is some connection, whether they are themselves neurodivergent or they have a family member or someone, is that belief that because that one person is this way, that everybody is that way. And that's simply not true. It's a spectrum. Autism is a spectrum, but really all neurodivergences are a spectrum in terms of that. We are all multifaceted in who we are, just like neurotypical people. And it's just a common misunderstanding that goes on. And it's thanks to the media, and it's thanks to, previous research. If you look at even just common TV shows on autism, I'm just going to throw out there because of my autistic background, every single one is a white man, right? Is what you see typically, a white man who's fixated on trains and, probably in some kind of science background, or in the medical field or something. And it's really, here I am public speaking right now. It really, and I'm a woman at that. So it really opens your mind to the diversity of individuals out there, right? But those are some common ones that I see.
Can we build on that? Because just building on what you are saying and working with these organizations, what are the biggest challenges people with different cognitive needs still face at work?
And there are lots. I want to say those challenges, first and foremost, they're numerous. And many are unique to the individual. So what I'm going to state here will not be every single challenge that somebody has faced. They'll be based on their own lived experience. But that being said, the biggest ones, it's already been stated. We have, people trying to get a job. We have over 85% of autistic people in Canada alone, but this is worldwide, over the age of 15, who are currently unemployed or they're underemployed. The fact that I'm employed full time is a rarity, and that's really sad, and it's kind of scary when you think about it. And so the challenges start with standardized hiring practices. When you apply for a job, the first thing that's screened is the application or the resume or both. And whether that's by a person, more likely now it's by an AI-based system, the biases start right away. So many neurodivergent individuals, and again, I'm making a blanket statement, this may not always be the case, but many that I have worked with, they don't necessarily have traditional education pathways. So they might have come through going through online courses. They may have gone to various different colleges or universities. They may have various different means and qualifications that qualify them for the job, but it's not a standardized way of getting into the job. And so they are automatically screened out because they didn't go this traditional 4-year degree or whatever it was. On top of that, it could be, that they don't have experience. A lot of times there's gaps on resumes. And that's sad, in and of itself. When we look at women in general, we take time off for childcare and we have gaps in our resumes as a result of that. And we get screened out. Now imagine that with a neurodivergent person who cannot get a job to get experience, but then we have these blanket resumes and job postings that say 5 to 7 years of experience. Well, what are they going to do if they can't get a job? So they may get indirectly screened out for that. Even just simply the keywords not aligning with an AI-based system. So, what in my world, in my job with Specialist Turner, our big thing is removing those barriers and saying, no, it's not about, we're not doing an AI screen. What we do is we take an application and we actually look at this application, and then we provide them, the individuals, with a means of then showcasing their skills in a different way. Because the next step is ultimately when they get accepted into, let's assume that the screening goes through well and they get through. The next step is a traditional interview. And unfortunately, interviews, in my experience, personal experience, as well as outside, those are the biggest barriers by far to getting a job because of the amount of bias that is in an interview. They're often not standardized. There's no means of, when we ask a question to someone, there's no way that we're actually rating or scoring that question. We have not necessarily the same individuals in the same interview. We also have individuals that come in and they're not asking the same questions over and over again. They're basing it on the interaction, which to some degree is okay in terms of pleasantries. But when it comes down to, can this person do the job? We're not doing that. And then we have the nonverbal component. And the biggest one I always say is, for me, eye contact is the biggest thing that I struggle with. I don't make eye contact with people that I just meet. And if I am, it's because I'm forcing it. And it's very uncomfortable to do. And what happens is if I don't do it, especially in an interview, I don't do the eye contact, I don't do the handshake, I don't do the things that I'm viewed as, I'm not interested in the job, I'm rude, I don't care, perhaps even deceptive at times because I'm not paying attention. So I must be making up a story in order to fit your scenario. So all of that happens. This is a long-winded answer because of the amount, but let's assume that they get into the job. Now, the difference is we get into the job, the next step is retaining them. Mm-hmm. And in turn, advancement, which we're not seeing is advancement. We have individuals who are neurodivergent, not in managerial positions. They are in entry-level positions, unable to move up. So they're getting in and individual employers are meeting these, quotas to get funding from the government and whatever, but they're not going anywhere. And unfortunately, the biggest problem that I see there is a lack of support. There's a lack of access to support. So accommodations processes are non-existent depending on the size of the company. If they are mandated to exist, they're too complicated. They may not have access to a medical professional to fill out required paperwork. It may not be a supportive medical professional. They may self-identify as neurodivergent, which is a whole issue in and of itself. And how that turns out in terms of what Rob will probably see in his research is we start seeing individuals not meeting performance expectations. They're accessing EAPs or employee assistance programs. They're perhaps seeing more absenteeism. What we see at Specialist Sterna is a manager will come to us and say, this quote unquote problem employee is not meeting our needs, and it's not like, what is the matter with them? What is the matter with them? And really what it comes down to is, is it really them though? Is it something else going on in the environment? And our workplace support, we provide coaching that supports all of that. The last thing I really, really want to highlight as well, because I know we need to move forward, is that lack of training for managers. One. And I think it's supporting anybody. Let me just say, I think that managers get promoted into these roles. They're not given the training to support. But the biggest one I want to highlight is remote work. This is a big topic that we see. The federal public service right now is going through a lot with the remote work topic. And a big thing that the pandemic did bring was remote work. And it's something for neurodivergent people that is so needed, and it's being thrown out now and saying we need to mandate these things and come back to work. But unfortunately, there's a lot of sensory overload that's happening in these open workspaces. So individuals are struggling. They're not able to meet the demands of their work. They're becoming these quote unquote problem employees when really the environment. So they're not able to perform. They're anxious, they're depressed. And despite the environment perhaps being the only issue, somehow they're the problem, not the environment. So I strongly ask employers to think twice about those mandates. And like it's if they're asking for an accommodation, then it's bigger. It's not that they want to sit at home and be lazy and be in their pajamas. It's bigger than that. So it's a long-winded answer, and because there's multi-facets of barriers that come in depending on where a neurodivergent person is in the job cycle or in the employment life cycle, right? But ultimately, that's what I can explain in the best possible way in this time period.
Megan, thank you so much. And Rob, we are going to come to you with the research piece, as Megan alluded to that. But before that, really, it's looking at the fact that the recruitment process is riddled with biases, right? From the second you put out the job posting or even identify that there's a vacancy, all the way up to when an individual is in the job role, whether they're getting promoted or not, what are the barriers? It's just riddled with biases. So that standardized hiring practices, looking at what your mandates are, all of these pieces incredibly important. So Megan, a wealth of insight. So thank you for that. Rob, I'm going to come over to you. Now, you've studied how companies like Microsoft have started to shift their hiring processes. Now, what strategies have you seen that actually help overcome barriers for neurodiverse talent? What are some strategies that you can share with us today?
So there are a lot of things in common when you look across the programs. So there are some very tangible things you can identify. I think the very first one has to do with what Megan has just been talking about, right? I think the first step is to realize and acknowledge that there are biases built into current employment practices, right? And nobody's accusing anybody of anything. These are clearly unintended biases, right? They're just the way we built our employment practices in an earlier time are not as well suited to our current situation. One of the things this implies, when companies need to change the way they do things, especially large public for-profit companies, they need practical approaches, right? So they need practical solutions. And one of the things, Megan has already alluded to it, and actually her organization, Specialist Sterna, gets credit, in my view, for this particular contribution way back in the early 2000s when Specialist Sterna was a young company. One of the things that they did at the outset was that they developed methods of skill and talent assessment that were much less interview-based. They were much more based on showing rather than telling. I like to say, if you think about it, it's kind of an odd place we have evolved to in the history of employment, that we rely so heavily on people's ability to talk about what they can do to determine what they can do. That's not obviously the most reliable way of discerning that, right? So a lot of companies that have gotten good at this beginning, many of them were trained by specialists, frankly, way back in the beginning. Microsoft was, SAP was. And they were trained in these practical methods for assessing talent that didn't require as much interviewing. That's a biggie. There are some others. Training for assessors about implicit bias, training for supervisors. Megan has alluded to this as well. I think this kind of a neuro-inclusion requires a particular style of supervision, one that's willing to adapt and learn and be flexible. In our research, we see that one of the biggest determinants of success of neurodistinct people in organizational settings has to do with their supervisor, not themselves, right? And that the moment of greatest danger to a neurodistinct employee can often be when their supervisor changes. So there's a lot to do there. Training of coworkers, awareness training for coworkers is common. Another thing that's big is accommodation processes. So, and not just for people who are designated as neurodistinct, but for everyone in the company. There's a misperception, I think Megan alluded to this too, that this is very expensive, but research suggests that it's not. Another thing that many companies do is they create what they call support circles. So these are people, mentors, buddies, and actually sometimes coaches outside of the organization, because there's some kinds of support that companies and employees are more comfortable if it's not happening within the corporate hierarchy, right? I guess those are probably some big hitters. There are lots of great details because these companies have learned a lot in accumulating experience. Specialist learner is a great example. But everybody who's followed this path has been on a learning journey. And every time you solve one problem, there's a new one that pops up. And that's just the way of organizational change, right?
And it is a learning journey. I love what you've just said, showing rather than telling. I think that's brilliant. And that really resonates with me as well. It's so important to show rather than tell. And then also the piece about, a great challenge being when supervisors change. And many people may not think about that. The accommodation processes to look over that, and then also support. So thank you for sharing some real practical things that organizations can do. Now, I want to get a little bit personal. Before I do, I would like to remind the audience, again, thank you everyone for joining. Please pop in any questions that you might have into the comment section of LinkedIn Live. We are moderating the discussion that's happening there. I want to make sure I get to as many questions as possible. So please pop in your questions and we'll get to them shortly. Megan, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to ask if you can share a personal story where neurodiversity wasn't just accommodated, but actually became a strength that helped to drive success.
Yeah. And I'm definitely comfortable. Very open person about what I've been through. And I think just before I can share the good part of the story, I have to share the bad part of the story. And so for everyone on the call, I am a late diagnosed autistic person. And what that simply means is that I didn't know about my autism until very recently. And so I found out in 2021, kind of mid-pandemic, guess what? After years of struggling with mental health, depression, anxiety, trigger warning, but suicidal ideations as well. And the biggest struggles that I had outside of my personal life was in the workplace. And unfortunately, I'm not going to name the employer for reasons, but the employer that I worked for over 6 years, I faced a lot of problems. And the biggest problems were with accommodations. I was held back. I was in an entry-level role for 6 years, the full 6 years, never had opportunities for growth, had development opportunities ultimately denied because I was told, you're not here enough. Even though I'm accommodating you, you're not getting any better. Why not? I'd done everything. I had gone to doctors. I had gone to use their employee assistance program. Anytime I could afford a therapy or anything at all, I did it. Took my medications, read the books, went online and looked for the magical quote unquote solution of what am I doing wrong so that I can do my job like everybody else. And it just wasn't getting better. And really, that ultimately reflects what I think a lot of businesses see is these employees that are struggling like this. And there's a lot of costs that goes into employees that do not, quote unquote, show up to work. Presenteeism, or employees that are actually away from the office, right? This is a big cost. Millions and billions of dollars go into this, right? And the magical is, what do we do better? What do we do as an organization? And the key is sports and managers changing. That Rob alluded to that, and I fully agree with it. Managers need to change. Organizations need to change. And I want to give I'll give an example of what that means. Now, of course, I work with an organization that is very aware of neurodiversity, but I still want to highlight this because I think it's important. I have had my own share of day-to-day struggles, as anybody will have in their personal lives. Things happen, and sometimes that comes to work with us, whether we want it to or not. And recently I had that, and what ultimately happened is that instead of being told, well, show up and do this, the response from management was, take the time you need, take breaks. What do you need from me to be successful? What supports can I help you with? Do you need me to take this work from you? Do you need, and those were things that in the other organization were never offered to me. It was instead a confrontation of, well, you're not showing up, so what's wrong? Instead, it was, I see that you're struggling. What can I do to support you? There's a very different dynamic that goes on there when somebody approaches you in that way. And here's the difference, is that I have been with my organization now. I started with my organization in 2023 in July, so just over a year. And I have made more gains with my organization in the work that I do, getting opportunities for development, more responsibility. I'm doing events. The thrive that I have made in this particular role compared to that other role is night and day, 180 difference. And that transfers to any organization. That simple understanding that we have, not just for neurodivergent people, for everybody, doesn't matter, neurodivergent or not. That simple understanding, that simple offering of support, those other means of support, it was already alluded to, coaches, buddies, employee resource groups are huge. Those are another great resource that I'm commonly seeing come up now that I'm so happy to see. Listening to feedback surveys, another really big thing is that we put these feedback surveys out and we're getting feedback, but then we're not really doing anything about it. So it gets this kind of vibe of, okay, well, I want to listen to you, but you know what? I'm not really going to do anything about it though. That doesn't really give you any buy-in or any real, why am I doing this job? Why am I here every day? Why am I coming to work every day? Other than a paycheck, which, by the way, it's going bigger than a paycheck to have a job that's meaningful. So that's my story of success, is that it's through supports and it's through those that they become, in turn, the strengths of who I am, neurodivergent or not, come out.
Megan, thank you so much for sharing. Deeply appreciate that. And we want to build on it. And so, Rob, I'm going to come to you. Building on Megan's story, how can leaders foster a culture that values neurodivergent talent and uses it to drive creativity and innovation?
Yeah, so culture is really important, of course. And culture is often set or signaled or greatly influenced from the top of the organization. And so there's a huge role here for executive leadership, executive sponsorship. One of the things that our research shows quite clearly is that the organizations, the large organizations that have been able to scale these kinds of activities and who have been able to maintain momentum are those that have ongoing support at the executive level. It does require a different way of thinking about capability building and about, why we hire and how we hire. One of the executives in one of the largest programs that we've studied talks about how their notion of how people fit in an organization has evolved. And in fact, the quote that I like to repeat from that organization, this is from a senior talent leader within the organization. She said the question to ask is not, does this person fit, but rather, is this person additive to our culture or our capabilities, right? So that's, I think that's a big one. We mentioned another one before, being flexible, being willing to learn, realizing that you're on a learning journey. Part of this learning journey, I think in most of the companies we've seen, is about not overgeneralizing. Megan's already talked about this a bit, but one of the companies that we've studied says one of the most important learnings that they came to, they state very simply, it's ask, don't assume. Another phrase, Megan's already talked about this, but it's worth, I always like this phrase, right? One of the things you hear a lot from the community is if you've met one person who's neurodistinct, you've met one person who's neurodistinct, right? That everybody who's neurodistinct is just as individual as everyone who doesn't identify that way. And the other thing, I guess this is a thing I'll leave you with, is that this applies to positive stereotypes as well as negative ones. That one of the things that most of the companies we've studied have gone through is a phase where they referred to neurodistinct superpowers, right? That somehow people who are neurodistinct are better at X or better at Y systematically. And I think what people have come around to, the most mature organizations have come around to realizing that a positive stereotype is still a stereotype. And the problem with that particular brand of labeling is that it sets unreasonable expectations, right? I mean, it sets people up to fail. An even bigger problem, I think, is that it's not fair, right? Why should people who are neurodistinct have to have superpowers to deserve the same opportunities that the rest of us count on having, right? So anyway, it's a little bit complicated, I think, the way you have to get your head around this. We've seen organizations evolve their thinking a lot. But I think if you're willing to go on that journey, you will find your way to a better place.
Thank you for sharing that. Fit versus additive. Ask, don't assume. And then also stereotype is a stereotype. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Megan, I'm going to come to you because you talked a little bit about accommodations. And I know we only have a few more minutes left as we discuss this incredibly important topic. When we think about, and when it comes to accommodations, what are some changes these can make to help employees with unique cognitive needs thrive?
I think the first one has already been kind of discussed, which is to ask and not assume. Again, that is the biggest one I ever want to hear or say about it, rather. The second one is a lot of employers come to me and they'll say, you're autistic, so give me a list. Tell me what that means and what things do I need to have? And the answer is there is no list. There is no perfect list. And I don't want you to go and Google lists ever. Don't do it. Ask the person instead, because that person is going to know themselves better than anyone else. However, you can come to them with some suggestions, and that I highly encourage you to do. Things you could do to make the environment perhaps more conducive to them. The biggest struggles by far that I see that neurodivergent individuals face are communication-based. So the way that we communicate is diverse perhaps from other individuals communicating that are neurotypical. So simple things you can do, speaking literally. So avoiding acronyms, avoiding idioms, just telling people straight up, this is what I need you to do. We don't need to complicate it. The other thing as well, giving the big picture. So, okay, I'm telling someone to create a PowerPoint. Why? Why are they creating a PowerPoint? What is the purpose of that PowerPoint? And what is it going to give to the person that is going to receive that PowerPoint? Sometimes just having that little bit of extra information is helpful. And a final one I'll leave you with is plain language. Plain language is something that has come up a lot, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it, that it's expensive to implement, that it's only going to help a few people, that it's dumbing things down. And these are all false stereotypes. This is something that is really helpful to everybody. And all these tips are, let me just say, neurodivergent or not. And a lot of managers are surprised when I say these things to them. They go, what? There's nothing different. I said, no, there isn't. There really isn't. You just need to, again, look at the situation based on the individual. Those are the biggest ones. Followed closely behind is looking at the environment. And I've already alluded to the option of remote work. An individual should be allowed to work wherever they feel is needed. That being said, I always explain it like this. I don't expect a firefighter to fight a fire from home, okay? But for individuals that can work from home, where it does permit it, let them. What is, if there's no reason, security or otherwise, that the individual is demonstrated they can do the role, let them work from home. It's okay. And a lot of times that is often the biggest thing that fixes every issue that is going on, is because you can control your environment that you are in. And I can tell you from personal experience, someone who was absent all the time in my last role, the moment I could work from home, the problems were gone. There was no more issue, and I was showing up because I'm no longer stressed. And that saves your company money really in the long run, because you're not paying for office spaces, you're not facilitating parking. All these other factors are coming into play. So those are the biggest things that I would say, but certainly they're individual. And I would really highly encourage, again, to work with your employee closely. Don't make an assumption and don't assume that they're a problem. Just speak to them. Treat them like anyone else.
And I love how you said, just don't complicate it, right? Don't complicate it. Megan, thank you for that. Rob, my question to you, and I know we're running short on time, but I want to talk a little bit about your research still. What's the concrete business case for investing in programs that support neurodiverse employees? And really, how can companies measure success?
Yeah, so every company we've studied approaches neuro-inclusion, neurodiversity employment from the standpoint that it is beneficial to the business, right? It's very important, I think, to the sustenance of the program during the next downturn, but also to the not stigmatizing the people who are in a program, to realize that we're here because we're good, not because you're doing us a favor, right? Not because this is some kind of a charitable activity. And so every company that we have studied maintains that, right? That this is, if you want to say it in kind of techie business terms, this is net benefit positive, right? We get more out of this than we put into this. Everybody is very clear on that point. That said, it's a little tricky to ask a question like, what is the return on investment of a neurodiversity inclusion program? And one of the reasons it's tricky is because we wouldn't be comfortable with that question if we were asking it about a lot of other groups, right? So how would it sound to our ears if we said something like, what is the return on investment of hiring women or hiring someone from a particular ethnic group? So there's a little bit of an ethical issue we have to be clear about here, right? That said, there are some very clear documented benefits that are easily discernible. Some of them are pretty obvious. Jobs have been filled in areas of skill shortage that would have gone unfilled. Many companies have said they've been able to hire better talent through these programs than they would have otherwise received. People talk about marketing benefits from favorable perceptions of the firm's activities. These are reputational benefits. Employee morale, meaningful work benefits. We hear that the current generation of new employees doesn't want to just get a paycheck. They want their work to be meaningful, and this marches in that direction. Another big one is innovation capabilities. When we see things from different perspectives, we improve our ability to innovate. Process improvements, Megan just talked about a big one. A lot of companies improve their communication standards after they begin these programs because they become more direct. And I don't know, that's a pretty good list. There's some more I'm probably forgetting, but there's plenty of benefit in these programs.
Absolutely. And both of you have provided incredible insight into what organizations can do. And so in one sentence, I'm going to go to both of you because we've got 1 minute left. In one sentence, what's one piece of advice you would give to organizations looking to start or enhance their inclusion initiatives for neurodivergent talent? Rob, I'm going to come to you first, and then Megan, we're going to end off with you in one sentence.
So I'd say get started, start small, walk before you run. Accelerate your learning by talking to companies like Specialist Startup.
Brilliant. I think there's a lot of commas in that sentence, and I love it. Megan, over to you.
We're on the same wavelength, obviously, because I was going to say, don't be afraid to get started. And very likely you already have started. It's really about going forward. And if you're not sure how to go forward, that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have to start over and to get more insight. It's okay. And as Rob already alluded, Specialist Learner and other organizations can help assist you. So I'm a LinkedIn message away. Just give me a shout and I'll do my best.
And the LinkedIn message is how we connected. I can't thank the both of you enough for joining us today and your invaluable insights. A huge thank you to Ivey Business School for sponsoring this LinkedIn Live today. What an incredible 40 minutes. Thank you for your insights, your expertise, all the work that you are doing. To the audience, thank you so much for joining today. We'll see you again next month. Professor Austin, Megan, thank you to the both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Well.